Mhm.
Hello, I'm Jeff Kramer, the author of Infinite Resources, and I'm here with Roger Carlson, the author of the Saving the World Before Breakfast
Mhm.
series of books. And together we're saving the world before breakfast with infinite resources. So, Roger, would you like to introduce our topic for today?
I would. And it occurred to me, hey, if we're saving the world or doing this infinite resources, maybe we can borrow from history. And way back in the 1400s, the Turks got an idea that they were busy conquering things and they really weren't interested in trade. So the Silk Road got cut off. And that was terrible. People didn't have their ginger and cinnamon, and the Europeans were freaking out. But that was good because that caused them to start exploring. Well, recently, the United States is getting this thing about protecting workers in the States and bringing, like, say, car manufacturing a home, putting as many of the uh, jobs and factories, car assembly plants back in the States. Well, that may be good for the States, but what about those other two countries, which would be Mexico on the south and Canada on the north? Like, maybe they could come up with their own uh, frosty mobiles for the north or Mexicanomobiles for the south. And they might be geared for more for those particular climates and uh, economies of those countries. So that's what we're going to get after tonight.
So we're going to try to focus on automobiles, but I think this is of course part of a larger picture. So what was it that spurred this change? And of course, that was the Trump administration bringing in tariffs on pretty much everything that's imported to the United States
Mhm.
in proportion to the trade deficit that the country that the product is being imported from is to the United States, which is a very interesting
Yeah,
mechanism to determine,
yeah. Well, the
how,
official one
how high
was
your
that
tariffs
the
are.
tariffs should be roughly equal between the countries, and there were some that were way off. Like they had zero tariffs that they had to pay. The United States had like 30 or 40, and so on. That makes sense. But the hidden one was the hidden goal was we want to bring all the factories in back inside the country,
Mhm.
and this is in contrast to what's been happening for the past, say, 30 years. It was more profitable to outsource, that was the term, outsource things to, say, Mexico with cheaper markets. And I think Canada was pushing a few things. Of course, uh,
Yeah.
Canada had some other advantages, some better machine tooling in some areas and so on. But in both cases, there's been a lot of investment, both north of the South U.S. border and south of the U.S. border. There's been uh, car car making plants built. There's been people trained. There's roads and railroads going to them. So this is could be an orphan capability. Now,
Yeah.
negotiations might go otherwise, but if it were to happen, so what are these orphan capabilities going to do? Might they find some other industry, maybe not even cars and trucks? So might be some other things that they could build, that they could find a new niche to keep those workers and those facilities going.
Yeah, so the here's the issue that I think. So the term was offshoring, and the idea was for a lot of my friends who are critics of capitalism say, well, essentially we were exporting our blue collar jobs to countries that didn't have labor regulations, and you could, let's say to pick on Nike, let's say you can set up a footwear production factory in Indonesia and pay 1/10 or less of what you would an American worker for the same kind of work,
Mhm. And maybe
and
no
then bring that.
lesser environmental regulations for your foundries so on.
Exactly. Exactly. So not only were we, when I say we, I'm talking about the capitalist West, um, looking to take advantage of less expensive labor, it was also to avoid environmental regulations. And essentially, we were also exporting our pollution. So, as a perfect example, let's take a look at the most of the um, magnets, rare earth magnets, are produced in China. Well, a large part of that is because China doesn't have the environmental rules required to, reclaim the um, highly toxic metals and this sort of stuff, and so it just ends up going into the environment. And I'm not an expert on China, but I'm just basically
Mhm.
extrapolating my thoughts here a little bit. So you take that to other uh, domains, whereas Canada and the United States in particular have pretty stringent
Mhm.
um, environmental rules, and that comes from hard experience. I mean, in Canada in the 80s, I remember we were talking about acid rain. And, in the US, you had Love Canal and burning rivers and all sorts of environmental disasters that are, some of them are still ongoing today with what's that, the Super PAC fund or something that they
Yeah,
call it.
it's called Superfund, and yes, there's a small number of things that have been dealt with, and there's a backlog of hundreds of other sites that they haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah. So it wasn't just the jobs that were being exported, it was also a lot of other things. And I like on the government of Canada, they have a website that talks about why we want free trade, why it's better to have free trade as opposed to imposing tariffs. And one of the things is some countries are just naturally better at doing stuff. So, as a perfect example, growing avocados in Canada is not a really good business because they would die every year before you could get a harvest, unless you read my book and start growing them on the polar ice cap. But um, but you
A
get the
vertical
point.
farm indoors where it can be kept warm, and there's artificial grow lights to keep them going.
Right. And so essentially what the Trump administration has come in, they basically said, okay, we're going to do this cold turkey. And unfortunately, when you think of how industry works today, we have trade, or not trade, but supply lines that can, cover hundreds of companies. And so, just as an example, of course, the best computer chips are made in Hong Kong by TSMC. And under the Biden administration, the U.S. was already working to onshore a lot of that technology, so that if something happened in Taiwan, we wouldn't. Again, I'm talking the West in general here, wouldn't be without a supplier of chips if, say, China invaded and bombed the factory, or for that matter, if the United States bombed the factory, so China wouldn't get access to that technology. And so Peter Zian, or Zion, I think is how he pronounces his name, talks a lot about this, and it's very difficult, and we saw this through COVID, changing suppliers and rerouting stuff around the world takes a huge amount of time. And as a business, if you normally get your steel from Canada or any country that you want, and all of a sudden that supply is cut off, that affects your business tremendously because now you're probably looking at a higher price because there was a reason you dealt with that supplier. It might be a higher price, it might be lower quality, it might be reliable delivery. Any number of things could affect your choice of supplier. And so what we're seeing now, if the United States wants to bring back all of the auto manufacturing into the U.S. from Mexico and Canada, well, of course, all of the big auto companies have built these maquiladoras in Mexico,
Mhm.
where they get the advantage of fairly technical savvy workers at a relatively low price, again, compared to the United States. And in Canada, we've also been able to supply the US with a lot of parts. So there's a company called Magna International, and they make parts for all of the auto manufacturers. And they have a really, the person who started that company, I think, was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia, and just a brilliant businessman. And he eventually managed to set up this incredible trade network. And the trade with Detroit is so important to Canada. There was only one bridge, the International Ambassador Bridge, that was going from Detroit to Windsor. The Canadian government has, on their own, because of the bottlenecks involved with that Ambassador Bridge, they spent like $6 billion to build the Gordie Howe Bridge. And I'm not sure if it's opened. It's set to be opened soon if it hasn't already. And that bridge will increase the amount of traffic flowing between the two countries significantly. But now, in light of what's happening here, it's kind of crazy. And so, how long does it take for GM or Ford or Chrysler or any of these companies to change their supply chain? And having worked in quality assurance, I know that you have to vet each supplier, and you have to test their products and all this sort of stuff. All of these things take time, and to just expect it to happen like that is kind of a fantasy.
Mhm.
So what do you think?
I think, well, that's a whole other issue. I'm just assuming, uh, uh, just going with the thing, if it were to happen and people would be getting their new connections, what kind of products would they make? And the thought came to mind is, hey, Mexican vehicles would probably like maybe bigger radiators, but on the other hand, the styling could be a little more rough and ready, especially say for a pickup truck, say the Burro, and that's the name that popped into mind
Mhm.
for that. And you could have a regular, a, yeah, regular bumper, but then a fairly cheap, yet disposable crash thing. Now the American and present Canadian cars, they have this very nice bumper, and you bump that, and it's like $1,000 to replace it. Well, that I
Exactly.
think they should have a cheaper thing there. And then another thing would be, especially being in the South, there's a more dependable sun, especially in the desert area like Sonora and North Mexico. You're going to get a lot of sun. So people have talked about the cab and the side panels could have the now cheaper photovoltaics. And
Mhm.
that would be, especially if you made it a hybrid, you'd you could keep the battery more than charged, and you have a thermostat. So if the car gets hot while nobody is there, the battery gets so full, the temperature gets so high, the fan comes on, and it keeps the interior cooler. Instead of being a solar collector and being up to 130 degrees, if it's 90 degrees outside, the cab will only be 90 degrees rather than 130 Fahrenheit. Don't ask me what that is in Celsius.
130, I think you're looking at 50 degrees or so.
Okay, yeah. So that would be one. Then I think Robert Zubrin, who interestingly had, besides talking about going to Mars and launchers, arguments in the aviation aeronautics field, he got into energy, and he said, Brazil has has made all their automobiles multi-fuel. So if you have uh, sugar cane and you make ethanol, you can run on it. Like American cars now, the Biden administration wanted to bump up the level of ethanol, and people said, "Wait a minute, cars. the extra water would start rusting things out because they weren't built for that. Well, the multi-fuel cars in Brazil have have the fittings that are not
Mhm.
going to rust. It costs a little bit more for that, but hey, you can go ethanol, methanol, of course, the gasoline. So that would be another one there. And I'm
So
thinking,
to get around that, I mean, we already have three grades of gasoline. So you could have like a 20% ethanol and regular 10% or regular 20%,
mhm,
and older vehicles that have fittings that don't
mhm,
meet that standard would use the lower grade or something like that, and eventually it would be phased out. But just this is exactly the kind of issue that we're talking about here. It's a supply chain, that's a fuel supply chain issue, where
mhm,
there's a desired outcome from an environmental point of view. Burning more ethanol, in theory at least, should reduce carbon emissions. And in Brazil, where they're growing sugar cane, I think they can make a decent case for that. Apparently, with corn, though, it's kind of been a bit of a failure because they're using more energy to produce the corn and to convert it to ethanol than they're actually getting out, or barely breaking even, or something like this. So it's kind
mhm.
of more of an exercise, almost like a thought exercise that's costing a lot of money.
I'll tell you what it's a successful thing. It's a successful welfare program which maintains a huge surplus capability for the United States. It's if there wasn't the ethanol program, the price of corn might easily collapse. And
Mm.
that would be terrible for Iowa, Indiana, Nebraska, places like that. They don't want to say that. And if they say it too loud, the environmentalists might figure it out and say, no,
So,
stop that.
so you mean the ethanol in fuel is something that Doge should have been looking at?
Well, uh, Elon went back to his companies there. So,
Oh, no,
and don't you be sending any postcards to him.
well, I don't think he has to worry, and I mean, obviously
He
everybody.
might be down to 30 billion instead of 40, the poor guy. He can't buy any medium-sized islands in the Caribbean for
You would
fun.
think that a guy as smart as I expect he is would not choose to get into a pissing match with the most powerful man in the world. But
Mhm.
anyway, here we are.
Yeah, that's
But
that's a whole
yeah, that's
real
completely.
another issue.
But yeah. Anyway, getting back. I mean, electric cars are part of the equation now too, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we've even before Trump was in office under the Biden administration, there was a protective tariff brought against Chinese electric vehicles,
Mhm.
100% tariff. That's crazy. Like, if from an environmentalist perspective, if you want to have the most efficient green car out there, you want to have the least expensive batteries, you want to have more people adopting it, and all of these other things, then you shouldn't be putting a huge tariff on it. And of course, the whole purpose of tariffs is it's a protectionist kind of
Mhm.
thing. So they're trying to protect the American workers in that case. And in Canada followed suit. I think that we were kind of obligated to under the Auto Pact. But it's interesting because I've heard some people calling for us to eliminate that 100% tariff on Chinese vehicles to make it easier to buy, you know, buy them here and switch to electric vehicles. And I think I don't remember what the price is, but I think you could, if it wasn't for that tariff, you could buy a Chinese electric vehicle for under $10,000.
Yeah. And also because the People's Republic of China favors, it wants to dominate that industry. So
Absolutely.
the Chinese car companies get favorable loan rates.
Yes.
Eh,
Yeah.
So,
And it's not just us. The Europeans have also put high bans on our taxes and tariffs on the Chinese
mhm.
vehicles. So that again, from an environmentalist perspective, the Europeans are supposed to be progressive, and we're going to fight climate change, and it's going to cost us money, but we don't care, because we got these highfalutin values. But what they're in essence doing is restricting the ability of people to make that switch. Now, in California, you've got the added issue of, you know, is your grid even capable of handling another 20% electric vehicles?
Yes.
Because you're all, if I'm not mistaken, you already experience brownouts on a regular basis and this sort of thing, right?
Not on a regular basis, but it's happened. And there have been rolling blackouts. I was vastly entertained when the news said California just barely avoided rolling blackouts. Like, what are you talking about? We had rolling blackouts. It's just the People's Republic of California won't allow the press to talk about it.
Uh, yeah,
And then
interesting.
I would add another issue about it is if you try to go all electric, unless there's some new batteries developed that aren't, say, lithium, it's the mining support. Talking about setting up supply chains on just anywhere in the world, setting up a new mine and getting the wharfs for ships or rail lines to go from the mine, getting the big scoopers, getting permits from the government. Even third world countries have to, if they think hard on this, like, what are you going to do there, and so on. So it's going to be hard to supply all the metals and things for that. But
Mhm.
kind of halfway in between the uh, the hybrids that have, say, a smaller motor and a smaller battery with maybe better better efficiency, probably the way to go.
Yeah,
Because
like
when you have that huge battery, it's got a lot of mass to it. Plus
in
the
my
issue of
case,
getting all the
I
lithium.
think a lot of people are in a similar situation to me, where more than 90% of the time, if I'm driving within 50 kilometers or 30 miles
Mhm.
of where I live. And so I could get by with a relatively small battery to go that distance and get home and charge again. And if I need to go further, then I'm happy to burn some gasoline to do that and have the best of both worlds. So yeah, I mean, my current vehicle, I've got a 20, I think it's 2011 Town and Country minivan, and it's
Ah, yeah,
100% gas.
family.
But
I
it's been doing great. I mean, we've had a few dings over the years and stuff, but
Mhm.
in terms of the mechanics of it, the engine and powertrain are still going along fine, and we've had it for what, 13 years now. So
Mhm. Yeah.
we bought it as a lease back after 1 year, so we got to avoid the initial drive off the lot sticker shock.
Yes, that's it. I'm a used car buyer, typically 5 or 6 years old, and I'm now up to 14, so I'm starting to look around.
Yeah.
But you can get to Canada later on. But for right now, a car that could, or vehicles that could deal with multiple fuels and possibly fuels with contaminants.
Mhm.
Like the issue years ago was catalytic converters, which are attractive to thieves, are great for cutting down on NOx, but they cost a lot of money. And if like high sulfur fuels, as Mexico had a few years in the past, those will contaminate they'll poison the catalysts, the catalytic
Mhm.
converters. So, it's a little bit extra bucks for able to handle anything. Like methanol might come on big. Hey, have space in the trunk, sacrifice you could do, yeah, methane or ammonia. There's people are talking about all these things for the future.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's kind of interesting because I actually have an idea that I'd like to to patent at some point. I don't think I ever told you this story, but I came up with,
Without divulging anything that
yeah, I'm
you
not
wouldn't
going to
want to
divulge
divulge.
anything, but I'm very interested in engine technology, and so my friends keep on sending me little videos. So I just got I'm putting in the chat here a link to a video about an engine. It's a from let's see, if you search on YouTube, the engine of our dreams exists. It's a clean, powerful, supercharged rotary valve two-stroke, and
Okay,
this was
rotary, yeah. Hmm.
Driving for Answers channel, and it's a very interesting and innovative design, and I quite like it. And I'd like to say that my idea takes a lot of what they have there and builds on it, and adds about more than 10% efficiency. So
Uh-oh. Your your file that you had. Yeah.
sorry.
Hopefully she won't switch back on. I clicked on your URL and there
Oh,
was
it started
the
up for you.
sales lady was hyping immediately.
Yeah. Well, you can go ahead and watch that afterwards. You got it in the record here, I guess. I don't know,
Mhm.
when you record these, does it keep track uh, of the notes, the chat for you?
Uh, this one does, especially if I remember. So if you remind me when we get to the end to click on that, and I have it in the background, so
But the
if you
reason
don't
I
have too
mention
many
it,
of them, yeah.
yeah,
But if you have some more of those engine things, because that was my thought that there was this uh, uh, fixation on making everything electric. We're not going to do anything more with internal combustion engines, and I think that is totally wrong for the reasons you're going into about
yeah.
the grid being overloaded.
Well,
But
the whole
if you have a
reason,
hybrid with a much more efficient internal combustion engine,
yeah,
then it keeps it charged. Hey, in a pinch, you go into the truck stop and have a coffee and a donut for half an hour, and you're definitely charged to keep going further
yeah.
because you'd have something like a rotary or a gas turbine is another a good thing. You can run it at a constant speed to be charging the battery and
Mhm.
regenerative braking.
Yeah. The reason I brought up this particular video is because towards the end of it, they show it switching between four different fuels. And I'm not sure exactly. It was gasoline and hydrogen for sure, but I think they might have done propane and maybe methanol or something like that in the mix
Mm-hmm.
as well. And the idea is that they were able to switch it on the fly. And normally you require like special carburation or whatever. So I imagine they have a special system for each of those different
Mm-hmm.
fuels. But it was quite kind of interesting, and it's a neat demonstration of being able to have that flex fuel capability built right into it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very
Yeah.
very future friendly. You can, it's almost like you remember in the Back to the Future series, the second, was it the end of I can't remember, the end of the first video when the
Yeah. Yeah.
doc
And
comes
in the
back, and
first
then
video where you
and he's got the fusion master in the back, and he's like
Mhm.
pouring beer in it, and also, oh, we just need mass, and we'll convert it and go
Yeah.
wherever we want.
I believe it was banana peel and a couple soda or beer cans that he plunked into. I think it was yeah, Doc Mr. Fusion or Dr. Fusion.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
And so if we can get to the point, like I remember when I was involved with outdoor camping and scouts and stuff, you could buy multi-fuel burners as well, so you could run it on kerosene or propane or whatever. I don't
Hmm.
remember all the details, but the idea being that whatever you can find handy and cheap, you can take it with you and use that when you're camping.
Hmm.
So but yeah, so flex fuels are definitely the future. I think ultimately, and I'm talking now 75 years or longer from now, we will see a serious move to electricity away from, at least for cars, away from internal combustion engines. And the main, so they'll still be around for hobbyists and people who like their old Model Ts and that sort of stuff. But for the most part, we'll go to electric because electric and motors are much more reliable, have fewer working parts, have a longer life, have higher torque, and of course, don't produce any emissions, which is particularly important in large cities like
Hmm.
LA. So
Or don't produce emissions at the
locally,
vehicle.
exactly,
So,
locally. I should have said that, yeah. But as we move more and more towards solar, wind, nuclear, hydro, like Canada is already, I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast. We have 60% of our electricity comes from hydro, about I think 11 or 12% comes from nuclear, and there's about 3% from wind and solar. And the remainder used to be coal, but it's now switched to natural gas. So
mhm.
in terms of emissions from our electric supply in Canada, we're well ahead of the United States and China and most other countries, even Germany, I would say,
Yeah.
because Germany
Well,
is still burning lignite.
yeah, Canada and Norway in particular, because the geography is such that there's a lot of good mountainous areas that get a lot of snow and rain, and they're good for power dams.
Exactly, yeah. So most of the hydroelectricity is in Quebec. So the Labrador Mountains between Newfoundland and Quebec produce a lot of so much electricity. I think I forget what the number is, but a significant portion of the
Mhm.
electricity in New York City comes from Quebec.
Mhm. Yeah, but I'm thinking we're, we're looking to try to develop uh, a local car industry, a vehicle industry, pickup trucks and cars, and smaller trucks. Actually, yeah, probably work work for 18 wheelers up to 18 wheelers as well. They're and for uh, countries they're largely rural in many areas. If you have a battery that's hybrid and a car there was again, this is if you're stuck in a trajectory, you've got a well-developed industry, you're not going to do these things. But if you have to do something different, well, you can do it a lot different. There was a number of people a few years ago saying, "Hey, if we make it if all vehicles could deliver electricity from their battery, it
Mhm.
makes a chopper chop the current to make it convert it to alternating. Your car could also be a a mobile power plant. Talk about having your camp stove and your lantern
Mhm.
for the scouting trip. Well, the family could go there. They can run the lights. They can run a projector for showing a movie.
Sure.
They can
Yeah.
they could run the lights for having a soccer game, something. And it's
So
a matter of if you make it a standard part of the package, then the price could go down.
a lot of that also goes back to like smart grids where um, you're able to buy and sell electricity at different rates depending on the demand, so you can charge your vehicle overnight when the electricity demand is low and the
Mhm.
system still has to produce base load power, and then sell it back. And I remember listening to one fellow, and he was judicious about the way his schedule and when he drove and all these sorts of things. And he ended up making money off of his vehicle
Mhm.
because the state that he was in was someplace out east. The state that he was in had a smart grid, and they were able to buy low and sell high, essentially.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, in the province that I live in, the government has the regulator is controlled by industry, and they aren't encouraging people to become independent of the grid. They are encouraging
Mhm.
people to do their own production. So, for instance, you can buy solar panels, and the government will actually subsidize that you buy solar panels, but you can only get so many solar panels to cover the amount of electricity that you used last year, and maybe 10% or something like that. The idea is at the
Mhm.
end of the year, they want you to have a zero balance in terms of the electricity usage, but they want to charge you for each month that you're connected. So I don't know how it is in California, but
Mhm.
here, half of our electric bill is essentially hookup charges, and
Mhm.
the city has a little bit. There's line fees, and then all these other add-ons and stuff. So in essence, you're not
Mhm.
independent, and you're still paying into the system to keep the grid going, even though you're producing all of your own power.
Mhm. Yeah, and you might, yeah, that was kind of the issue, and yeah, similar things with people bought solar panels in, I think Nevada happened first, in California. Then, as there were more and more solar panels on rooftops, the state said, "Oh, uh, I get," or the utilities say, "We can't, we just can't pay you as much anymore." So they cut down the, the payment back,
Right.
and people were saying, "Wait a minute, we're we spent this money and we expected to get this return, and you changed the rules of the game." Well, we're
But
the
that wouldn't be bad
Utilities Commission. We could do that.
if they gave a fair rate, and we're still, you were still able to use your electric
Mhm.
vehicles battery
Mhm.
system to buy and sell and moderate the load. You could probably still make a go of that.
Mhm.
But then here we're getting the all of those flat charges every month. And
Mhm.
yeah, like if I was to get solar panels, I'd like to get it so I have an excess of electricity and have my own backup power system. And yeah, if
Mhm.
I could feed into the grid, great. And if not, then I wouldn't bother. But they, again, the
Mhm.
rules, and this is probably something this would be a great topic actually for another day,
Yeah,
is the
business,
politics of
government, individuals trying to deal with the
yeah,
electric utility. Yeah.
the politics of the connecting to the grid, and trying to be uh, self-sufficient, energy self-sufficient. Because in fact, our houses, even in Alberta here, we get enough sunlight to not only power our homes but heat our homes, even in the middle of winter. In most cases, of course, there are stretches where you might go several days where it's cloudy and cold, but on average, over every month, you have enough energy to do that, which is pretty incredible when you consider that in the winter we might only have 6 hours of sunlight or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. With that latitude and the sun, it, not only it's less time, but it's at a low angle. So
Yeah,
there's less energy getting through that longer conduit of atmosphere.
yeah. But there are a lot of technologies that can be used, and of course, electric heat pumps and uh, can help. They're more effective in terms of energy being used, as long as it doesn't get excessively cold. And if you're using an air-to-air heat pump, of course, if you're getting heat from the ground, that's a much more effective way of doing it.
Mhm. Yeah, that is another one. I think we might have even mentioned in the past about oranges in the snow
Yes,
from
yes.
Alliance, Nebraska, where he has the
Nebraska,
big
exactly.
pipes underground, and it keeps his Mediterranean climate even in Nebraska January. So,
Yeah. So
mhm.
definitely doable. But getting back to cars, and again, you and I aren't experts in this field. We're just two guys hashing it out who have a little bit of knowledge on the subject. And
Yeah, we have some ideas. We find some guys. If we found good ideas or two, then we look for people that might actually make it work.
yeah,
Which leads to the question: if we were starting somewhat from the beginning in Canada, making a Canadian car, since you have this industry, which is for some reason would not be selling parts and things down to the United States, what kind of things would you do different for your vehicles?
well, I mean, you got Canada. the majority of Canadians live within 200 miles of the US border.
Hmm.
And so really northern US and southern Canada are very similar in terms of climate. So we're dealing with the same kind of issues. The exceptions, of course, would be if you start to get into the polar areas, and it's the same thing with the US and Alaska.
Hmm.
When you start to get into regular temperatures of minus 40 degrees and you try to start a diesel engine, well, good luck.
Hmm.
Unless you've got it in a heated garage or something. Most truckers, even here in the warmer areas of Canada, you go past a truck stop and those truckers will have their engines running all night long. They're just idling and keeping everything nice and warm in the middle of winter. I think even in the summertime they do that just so they have their source of electricity and stuff.
Hmm. Yeah,
Fuel's
particularly
just a business expense.
for refrigerated vehicles and so on.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there's not a huge amount of difference, but I thought it was interesting. I remember a friend of mine was telling me that um, you know, most of or I can't even say which ones, but I wouldn't doubt it if all of the North American auto manufacturers test their vehicles in the extreme heat of Death Valley to make sure that their cooling systems are up to snuff. And if it can survive Death Valley, then it can pretty much handle anything.
Hmm.
And
I
in
think it's
terms
right.
of
There was Arizona, and then speaking of Mexico, I think they moved their site down to Mexico for their hot spot.
okay, but I mean, doesn't Death Valley have the record for the hottest temperature, at least in North America?
I believe it does. That's one
Right.
of those ironic things. The hottest temperatures are not at the equator, but it's I think kind of the desert zone, another 20 or 30 degrees
Well,
north or
part
south.
part of that is also because Death Valley is below sea level at the lowest point, right? And so you have
Yes.
denser air there too.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, Death
so if
Valley and uh,
the Dead
the
Sea or
Dead Sea in the Middle East. Well,
yeah,
both of those.
the
Meanwhile,
Afar Triangle and the Qatar Depression as well.
oh, that would be that would be another one. Meanwhile, just looking for ideas. If you're in a fairly cold country, there be a thought of having a separate heating system where you could have a little heater that would be like near your radiator or somewhere near your block, so you could just open the cock and start getting some kerosene. Whoop, yeah, yeah, kerosene. Yeah, might have to have a heater for that. It might have uh, uh, yeah, propane would probably be better, and so you can warm something up if you, for some reason, could not have your vehicle going at night, and it's January, and it's yeah, you might was it minus 44, which is the same in
Yeah.
Celsius and Fahrenheit.
So
Uh,
let me tell you
whatever
a
that
little story
temperature
about
is
that.
around in the 40s.
My first vehicle was a 1958 Volkswagen Beetle. And
Hmm.
now you might recall that those were air cooled and rear engine.
Yes,
And so
yes, I've driven them.
in the wintertime, it was interesting. They had a flat front screen windshield. And so it would try to get air from around the engine ducted to the front of the vehicle. And when it was like minus 20 Celsius, you know, there would be two little areas where the vent came up where it'd be free of ice. And the rest of it was essentially like looking through a frosted window. And so I'd be scraping on the inside of the windshield as I'm driving along. And they did have an option for a gas heater, which was literally an air heater that burned gas to warm up the area. My vehicle didn't have that option.
Mm.
So
So
what I
this is
understand,
something that's been done before then.
yeah, with electric vehicles, I was asking somebody, so how's it in the wintertime? It must draw an awful lot of electricity to heat it up. And they said, well, when you're charging, you just have the heater is supplying the heat directly. And it's kind of like what you were describing earlier. It's like you have a 1500 watt heater that, or however many watts of heat that
Hmm.
it puts out, but you're just using electricity to get direct heat as opposed to, extracting heat
Hmm.
from the cooling system. So in that sense, it's actually not that heavy and and fairly efficient. And what people do in Canada, when it gets really cold, you can buy battery warmers so that you're not only your fuel and oil stay warm with a block heater, but you can buy
Hmm.
battery warmers that'll keep your battery reasonably warm, so you get a decent amount of cold cranking amps to get the vehicle started.
Yeah, South
So
Dakota was cold enough that what became an issue.
yeah,
You got to be able to crank enough times to get started on a
and
cold morning.
and a lot of people, kind of as an aftermarket type thing, will just run, like I said, a 1500 watt electric heater. If you're already plugged in for your block heater and your battery heater, you put another plug there and get actual heat into the car, and you can have it on a timer so that it starts heating up half an hour or so before you head off
Hmm.
to work. So there are options for dealing with the cold. In the most extreme cases I've seen, if you're trying to start an old diesel engine, there's some great YouTube videos. There's one I remember, like a old American diesel truck, army truck,
Hmm.
and they got this thing. I think it might have been in Alaska or something. It was a really cold morning. You pull out the tiger torch and you put that directly on the oil pan to get that oil warmed up, and then you make sure you have enough juice that you can crank it over a few times, get the glow plugs going or whatever, and
Hmm.
it starts out and it's really smoky and barely running, and then
Yeah.
it eventually gets going and comes to life.
Hmm.
But yeah, we just deal with it. It's you have to deal with the cold. Just make sure your backup systems are there if you need them.
Okay, so that yeah, dealing with the cold would be the major thing that you'd be talking about to do.
Well, and winter
Yeah.
tires and stuff
Mm.
like that, right? So you probably don't need to have all weather tires in Mexico like we do here.
Yeah. The other hand, oh, another thing I was thinking of, there was a French company that had a car that when you wanted to, it had a pneumatic system so that the shocks would
Mhm.
make your car, yeah, yeah, high, like like you have a jack up rig, which is great if you're going to cross a stream or something. Again, if you got roads that are less well maintained, and that would be something that would be.
Well, there's that, and then there's also, of course, dirt roads, and then there's up here in Canada we get a lot of potholes because of the freeze thaw cycles going on.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
a lot more so than in California, anyway.
Hmm.
Not to say that you guys don't have potholes. I know it happens down
Hmm.
there too,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Well, in my other life, like I was mentioning, South Dakota, yes, we have the potholes in the spring. When it thaws, things not only does the water flow more in the streams, but we got more potholes in the streets.
yeah. But the those are all things that we deal with. It's kind of interesting. In places where you have a high enough population density like Germany, um, they put a huge amount of engineering into their roads, and they have, I think somebody told me they have like 6 inches of asphalt on their
Mm-hmm.
autobahns, and that keeps them from warping and all sorts of stuff. Of course, they don't have the extreme weather that we have in Canada,
Hmm.
but even like with the extreme weather, we don't go to that effort of building these huge, you know, massive road decks.
Yeah, that would be expensive.
Right.
It's not as expensive as gasoline, but that asphalt adds up as well.
Well, but the other thing is, like, Canada's got a population of something like 40 some odd million people
Hmm.
uh, in an area. Well, I think the Trans Canada Highway is about 8,000 kilometers long. Um, which is 50,000 miles. Sorry, five
Yeah,
thousand miles.
one one decimal point.
Yeah, and but you can fit all of Germany easily into Alberta. I mean, so and they got a population density that's more like I think 80-ish million or something like that.
Mhm.
So in terms of the amount that you can invest in your roads per mile per person is a lot more, and so you can have better, higher quality roads
Mhm.
than what we can afford up here.
Mhm. And then, yeah, and of course, a similar thing with like we say, well, railroads are so wonderful in Europe. Well, that's because it's high high density population. Of course, they have
Yeah,
more
exactly.
railroads on the East Coast because there's enough people, and and their cities evolved to fit with the trains.
That's right.
Whereas LA and Dallas and Phoenix, they were set up for set up for cars.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. Canada was kind of a leader in high-speed rail early on before the bullet train and stuff. And they had a decent corridor going from, Quebec City down to Toronto. But over the years, they kind of lost the lead, and now they want to put in a real high-speed rail network, Quebec City, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, down to Windsor. And it's going to cost, I forget the amount. I'm not even going to try to put a number on it, but many billions, anyways.
Mhm.
And these government projects always end up costing a lot more. Again, this is ostensibly as a environmental program that should help the
Mhm.
environment. But here's the interesting side note is the rail system, of course, originally 1800s and all that stuff, and then developed. And even if you look at the bullet trains and the high-speed rail that China and France have and all that, we may be entering a period now with autonomous electric vehicles where it will be more cost effective for people just to hire a cab for whatever length of trip that they want to. Yeah, it might not be as fast to get from place to place, but it's not going to cost billions of dollars either.
Or an
Or maybe,
electric air cab.
well, I was just going to say the next step, of course, is an air cab, exactly. So that in that case, you're probably getting comparable speeds
Mhm.
without having to have a pilot's license.
Yeah, so things like going from say Los Angeles to San Diego, 100 miles, and it would be, of course, it'd be more fuel efficient to be on a train uh, or an airplane, a big jumbo jet for passengers. But you could say, I want to go in 10 minutes, and
Yeah.
guy pulls
You,
up, and away you go.
you want to go on your schedule, not somebody else's. And so this really comes down to your a person's view of the future. Do you think that we're going to be living in an age where energy is inexpensive, where everybody will have their own robot and their own access to flying cars and all of this, the science fiction
Mhm.
dream future that we've been told
The
about?
Jetsons.
Yeah, or are we going to be living in an age of scarcity? And the next few years are really going to determine which way we go, I think. So
Mhm. Yeah, I think it needs to evolve rather than the government trying to determine government running new technology. If they're uh, managing existing technology, it's like, oh, you can't have more pollution than this. You got to have the rails checked so often. That's fine. But
yeah,
when they say, oh, are we going to go with wind and solar rather than coal? Oh, we're going to this. Problem with government is it gets excited in one direction. For instance, when we were just going to run out of oil, we're going to have peak oil by maybe the 80s or 90s, and Jimmy Carter just followed what a lot of experts were saying. We might be running out of this, so we need more coal. And I'm not really cool on nuclear. Well, that was good. Except Ronald Reagan came in and said, "Heck with that solar. take that damn uh, solar water heater off the roof in the White House,
Yeah.
and then of course it went on with Clinton and Obama were big time on solar and wind, and then Trump is against it. He's doing a great job of killing off the wind projects on the East Coast. You
Yeah.
know, if
So this is, I think I might know where you're going with this. If the government would just butt out and let the market determine which way they want to go, that would be a much better system, laissez-faire, essentially.
I would, yeah, if all things being equal, I think so. Yeah, the government can come up with some wild and crazy research, but to make it work, it's got to be business. The example would be the idea of hydrofracturing to get natural gas out of tar sands and shale deposits. The government researched that along with just a zillion other things, including OTEC, which is still it was a desperate thing to make it profitable. Well, the
Yeah.
government researched everything. Fracking was the one of the least things they did. Like, hey, we'll never make it with this, except Mitchell Energy. They had the contracts to deliver. Their their wells were starting to play out, and so they tried this new thing, and they kept trying desperately. And big companies, government and big companies, they're the same sort of bureaucracy decisions. I think if it doesn't work, we'll just drop that research project.
Yeah.
Well, Mitchell Energy said, we've got to go. We got to make it work. And they were desperate. Some of their last wells, they made it work. And that's where the revolution happened. Likewise, the governments had jets, which were in World War II. Maybe fortunately for us, they were very inefficient for energy use. So the Germans didn't, that's one of the reasons they didn't make as many jet fighters.
Mhm.
When, but over time, the jet engines have gotten more and more efficient. And of course, harking back to Dr. Barry Prentice, who we were talking to last week, he's wants to compete with airships, but they've by 0.5% and 1/4% this year and that year, and then 1%, and then these blended bodies that might be 10 or 15% better. The dirigibles might never catch up. The, the jets will still be cheaper. That's why I get blueberries and they Peru grapes, Chile.
Yeah.
Amazing, they're doing that, and
It
now and they're
really
making a
is.
profit at it. It's a little more expensive, but
Well, and I'm always amazed too. It's like, so of course in Canada, getting bananas or like you say, grapes from the other side of the world, how do they manage to keep them, pick them at the right point so that they know they're going to be properly ripe when they arrive? Or
mm,
even, storing apples. The technology has come to the point where it's like they can store apples pretty much all year round and they just control the environment which prevents it from rotting and keep it
mm,
cool enough and all this stuff. I guess they also might put wax on the surface or whatever to keep it from dehydrating.
mm.
But then when it comes time for it to go to the market, then they'll add some ethylene or something and have it get ripened and off you go.
Yeah, that's a cheat there. But there's actually you might not know coming from Canada, but there's John Steinbeck, famous writer in the
Mhm.
30s through the 50s. One of
Grapes
his
of
most
wrath.
yes, and another thing was the lettuce of disaster. And there's one of his books. Was it East of Eden? I guess is the
Yeah,
name of it. It as if one of the sub stories in there was one of the characters was had the idea of shipping lettuce
yeah,
to the East Coast, and unfortunately, in the story, and I'm sure this happened in real life, his train of lettuce that was refrigerated and there's blocks of ice to keep the rail car cool enough, not frozen, but cool enough.
Yeah,
Anyway, somehow got shunted to a siding somewhere, and it was too late. And the lettuce was mush.
yeah, that was
But
one of the James Dean movies. I remember that scene.
mhm, yeah, but it was something. This evolved to where the I'm thinking the Salinas Valley. Yeah, I think it's Salinas Valley became a center for lettuce production in the United States. So some people did make large amounts of money, and it became a standard thing. And
Mhm.
getting on. Uh, I remember the peach crates that would show up in the grocery store. That was coming from California, so it slowly evolved. That was something, late 1800s, early 1900s. That was one of the food revolutions of the day.
Mhm.
So they're doing it, and who knows?
I mean, the food
Dirigibles.
technology. Think of this. Before Napoleon, there was no way to really preserve food apart from freezing it if you happen to live in the Arctic, salting it
Hmm.
if you wanted like meat and stuff, hardtack and all that.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
jerking it,
yeah,
dried it out with another one.
yeah. But and then you'd have fermentation technologies, so like kimchi and sauerkraut and
Hmm.
yogurt and stuff like this. Um, but there weren't really great food preservation technologies until Appert, essentially invented canning and won Napoleon's $1 million franc prize to
Hmm.
preserve food.
Yeah. That was one of those things where the government has this wild, crazy ideas. Sometimes they do quite well with it. It had a few dips in the road, like the Franklin expedition, and their
Exactly,
it's
yeah.
you heard
Lead
the story.
poisoning from your food.
Hmm. Again, that was a quality issue which they didn't quite understand at first.
Well,
People always
I
keep
find it
forgetting about lead poisoning.
we're very lucky to live in the times that we do, in the sense that we're aware of all these toxins. Unfortunately, we can't avoid many of them. You
Hmm.
think of like microplastics and stuff nowadays.
Yeah, or yeah, it's like people keep forgetting the closest humanity came to killing itself was gets us back to cars.
Yeah,
Tetraethyl
tetraethyl
lead
lead. Yeah,
was a you can't think of a better way to spread lead poisoning to the whole planet than having all the vehicles putzing on the highway delivering tiny, tiny particles
so
of
you,
lead
you want to hear
compounds.
hear an interesting NAFTA story that's associated with that?
Mhm.
So part of the agreement between when Canada and the U.S. originally signed NAFTA was that if you're purchasing stuff from, like, if Canada's purchasing stuff from the United States, they have to keep on purchasing it from the United States and stuff. And so when Canada wanted to phase out tetraethyl lead from their gasoline, which I believe the Canadians did it before the Americans did, I believe they were sued by the companies that made that additive, saying you can't cut us out. This is our deal, and this is part of the international agreement we have.
Oh, geez.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting, and that's also part of the reason why Canada is very reticent to start selling the U.S. water, because once we start, if say we diverted a river to go to Arizona or something,
Mhm.
once we start that diversion process, we have to keep it up at the same kind of flow. So even if our glaciers dried up and we couldn't supply the water anymore, we'd be legally obliged to do that. Of course, now that Trump has essentially torn up that agreement, that's not an issue. But
Well, see, another benefit that you didn't realize.
well, the
Because, like
funny
I
thing
said,
is,
mhm,
the funny thing is, it was the USMCA, or whatever you want to call it. Every country calls it by a different acronym. Um, that was originally signed by Trump, Trump's first administration. And he called it the most beautiful deal and all this sort of stuff.
Hmm.
And then when he started announcing these tariffs, he's like, "We have the worst deal possible." This he just went from one extreme to the other. And unfortunately, uh, he's developed a bit of a reputation now of being an unreliable negotiator. So, and what were they calling him? The taco president?
Well,
Trump always chickens out.
that's the Democrats, yeah, the left wing says that. But we're talking about uh, dealing, taking lemons and making them into lemonade. So we're doing some of that, getting us back to where we started. The problem of Silk Road being cut off and the spices and a number of other things that prompted a revolution that was much bigger than the relatively small amount of goods that came back and forth
Mhm.
on those roads. They were fabulous luxury goods were the only things that moved. And then once the the exploration revolution got going, never succeeded in Northwest Passage, but Cape of Good Hope
Yeah,
and going around the south end of South America and building the Panama Canal,
yeah.
transcontinental railroads
A
and
lot of
things.
innovation came because of that.
Hmm.
It's kind of interesting talking about innovation and unexpected things. So since the Trump administration put a 10% tariff on all of Canadian energy, we've actually sold more energy this quarter than we did last year at this time. And so essentially, the American consumer is just paying an extra 10% that's being collected by the federal government.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, these things with government activities, there's major things happen, and they don't, to them, just a tiny percentage of what they're doing. And so, if you're in the right place, you can pull in some dinero there.
absolutely.
So, enjoy the good things and see what you can do about the bad things. And
Yeah. Well, going back to that example now, so what the result has been on Canada, speaking as a Canadian, um, with Trump essentially creating a unnecessary trade war with us in Mexico, it's caused us to look abroad for other trading partners.
mhm,
And it's also, like I just mentioned, the energy exports have actually increased to the United States, but now we're looking to broaden our export markets as well. And
mhm,
so, for the first time in a long time, we're seeing the federal government and most of the provinces, and even areas of Canada that have been opposed to building pipelines for export of fossil fuels, like Quebec and British Columbia, and Indigenous groups. They're kind of saying, you know what, this is a new reality we have to face, and we're going to open up our minds to this.
okay.
And
Well,
so,
that's good because
well, it's good
we
for
want to get
Canada for
moving.
sure.
And as opposed to Justin Trudeau, who the Europeans were nosing around,
Oh,
like saying, "Hey, can we get some of your natural gas that you're producing a
absolutely,
lot
yeah.
of?" And he said, "We'll make hydrogen for you. We don't have it yet, but when we get it, we are going to sell it to you."
Yeah.
And the Europeans said, "Like, we need the natural gas now."
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's one of the things I quoted in my book. It just alienated so many people out here in Alberta, where we have huge amounts of natural gas resources, and it was that Japan came to us and Germany came to us, literally asking for us to develop
Mhm.
this technology and sell us our natural gas. And now one of the announcements that Trump made was, Japan signing a $40 billion natural gas deal. Like that could have been Canadian natural gas, right? So, I mean,
Mhm.
good for you in the U.S. that you're selling it. And the the interesting thing is the market for natural gas around the world. Everywhere else, the price is really high. In North America, we have so much of it that it's ridiculously low for what it is.
Yeah. And the other surprise, there may be massive amounts of hydrogen. The market might flip again. And I guess I'll mention an earlier flip. The ports that were set up for moving natural gas were originally being built to import natural gas because the United States thought we would be short of it. In fact,
Right.
everybody thought they'd be short of natural gas. It was going to be peak gas. Lo
Yeah.
and behold, those doggone capitalists found a way to make it work.
Well, it's at the point. There was a show on Discovery Channel years ago called License to Drill, and
Mm.
I remember watching it, and they were drilling someplace, I believe, in the Northwest Territories, and it's like, yeah, we just found this. We've got a proven reserve now. They drilled the well down, they measured the flow rates and all that stuff. I was like, okay, now we're going to cap the well, and maybe in 50 years we'll come back to it because it got so much. It's like, what's the point of even drilling if you're not going to be using it in the next 10 years, right?
Yeah.
But rather amazing that we have such an abundance. Like I think Canada has proven reserves that could last us well over 350 years of natural gas at our current use rates. And
Yeah.
that's part of the reason why plastic is so inexpensive because we use these
Mhm.
natural gas chemicals to produce the plastics.
Yeah. And there's and the reserves are a reserve is something that is marketable today. If the
Mm-hmm.
price goes up 10%, the available reserves might increase 20% because it's affordable to tap these things in deeper water, or you have to
Mm-hmm.
go further up into the tundra
Right.
or drill deeper.
Build a
So,
pipeline. Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah,
exactly.
there's a lot of fascinating. Like I, you know, when I graduated from university, I we were in the middle of a oil downturn. The price of oil was below $10 a barrel or something in
Yeah.
early '90s, and and I was like, oh, I never want to get involved with the oil and gas industry. That's just it's so boom and bust and all this. But it's almost unavoidable. If you live in Alberta, you're somehow or another your business, if you're particularly in engineering, you're going to be involved with the fossil fuel industry at some point. So
Yeah. So, yeah, you have at least one occasion, but probably several occasions you've been working for.
yeah, well,
Uh,
I'm hoping to get on with a company to do some more work with them, not as a full time employee or anything like that, but some contract work. And I'll I'll find out this week if we're
mhm.
going to go forward with that. So keep my
Okay.
fingers crossed on that one.
Yeah. Good luck on that. And say we're finishing up with a lot of optimism. So maybe this is a good. We'll have optimism for next week as well as in the sweet by and by with new technologies.
Yeah, fair enough. So, any final conclusions with regard to on onshoring the automotive industry to the United States?
Yeah. Well, I think it was the same one that I started with. It's if it if it does happen, I guess people look around and see what you can do with that industry, and you might just invent something entirely new.
Yeah,
There's so many cases where people they got cut off one supply, and so they came up with something new. So
yeah.
back to that optimism thing.
Well, it's interesting looking back historically in the early 1900s when the automobile was starting to take off. There were hundreds of automobile manufacturers. The old horseless carriage.
Yeah,
uh,
little
Yeah,
companies.
little one-offs, and they weren't mass producing them to the same extent. So Oldsmobiles and all of the brand names that we hear, Pontiac, all of
Hmm.
those ones, some of them that no longer with us. But it's interesting, the Dodge brothers were a Canadian company,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
so there were a few on the Canadian side of the border too, which is part of the reason I think why the auto pact made a lot of sense. It's like some things Canadians can do better than Americans and vice versa, and it kind of makes sense to work together. And why
Hmm.
not? I mean, in so many respects, we have a very common heritage.
Hmm.
So why not take advantage of the same language, the same
Hmm.
ideas in terms of
Indeed.
capitalism and so forth? So
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully that'll keep going. So
we'll see.
we have some worries, but by and large, it's it's worked out okay for the last couple 100 years. Minus a couple bumps on the road,
Yeah. What
1770s, 18 teens.
I was just thinking we should incorporate into our introduction like the date and this sort of thing. So it's June 15th today, Father's Day in Canada. I think it's the same in the States.
Oh, yes, it is. I was going to ask you if it was also the same date in Canada. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're
And so, just to put that into context, and the news of the world is last week, Musk and Trump had a little tiff, and Israel just bombed Iran. So who knows? Maybe we're seeing the start of World War III. But
yeah.
we want to end on an optimistic note.
We were doing so well until you came to your conclusion there.
Bloody Canadians.
Yeah, actually, there might be some optimism there. The uh, the Iranians are actually the ones that are making the drones for Russia. Russia really doesn't have the engineering and the materials. I mean, the fuel, the engineering staff, and the, uh, the chips.
Yeah,
Iran has made a major effort over the years. They are the drone, but there's Ukraine and Iran. Well, the Iranian capability is getting knocked off, and if that is shut off, Putin is in trouble
yeah. Well,
because most of
I
the
have
drones
been.
are coming from Iran, and if
Yeah,
only the Ukrainians have drones,
yeah. The Shahed drones have been coming from Iran, but Iran has taught the Russians how to build them now. And so the Russians are building a lot of those drones. Um, it's rather incredible. Yeah, I follow the Ukraine war almost every day.
mhm,
I listen to Denis
yes,
Davidov.
it is addictive.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not interested in the what you want to call it, war porn or whatever. But the reason I do it is because I don't want to forget that, even though we're living our lives pretty much oblivious to
Mhm,
the effects of this war, that brave people are dying to fight for their freedom and oppose an aggressor, and
mhm,
that has some serious ramifications for us here, and so that's why I like to keep it at the front of my mind here.
mhm.
But yeah, anyway, the Iranians have definitely been a leader in the basic drones. They're not really advanced like the Shaheeds. They're essentially, this is kind of funny. After I graduated high school, I went down to Florida for 6 months and
Mhm,
helped my uncle build a Long Easy variant.
mhm.
And he was at that time, that we're talking like 1987, he was saying, you know, the military, we could make these planes into pilotless drones. And the thing is, we're making them too inexpensive. The military won't buy them unless they're multi-million-dollar things. And
This
he
is the
essentially
problem
was
with
right.
big
Yeah.
institutions.
Well, so the Predator drones and stuff like that are multi-million-dollar drones, but essentially they were very similar in concept to what he was building with that Long Easy design.
Hmm.
And yeah, anyway, so the Shaheeds are very much like that, but I think like the Bayraktars that Turkey is doing are even more advanced. And of course, Ukraine has not only gone with aerial drones and they're using the Chinese drones to great effect, but they're
Hmm.
also developing their naval versions. So they're able to take out. I mean, it's embarrassing that the Russian Black Sea Fleet is essentially cowering in the corner, trying to avoid being hit by Ukrainian drones.
Yes, off in the northeast corner of the Black Sea, and if they try to venture out, they
Yeah,
go to
but
the
I mean,
bottom.
this is a lesson for every navy, and so this is part of the reason why I think the United States is no longer actively um, maybe I'm wrong, but as I understand it, they pulled their carrier force out of the Gulf region to a large extent because of the vulnerability to to drone attacks from Yemen and stuff.
Yeah, they lost one, was it $30 billion fighter plane because the carrier made a sharp turn to avoid a drone,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a drone, which is like maybe five or $10,000, 30
yeah,
billion splash.
exactly. There was was it the Daily Show had a little piece on that, and it's like we're sending more aid to the bottom of the Red Sea than we are to Ukraine.
Yeah, fortunately, the United States sent a fair amount to the Ukrainians, and hey, the British and French and Dutch and
Yeah.
Danes are still doing it. And if,
Spanish,
like I say,
Swedes,
if
Finns.
the Iranian supply chain is cut with a number of drone uh, managers in the Iranian drone program have died recently,
Mhm.
and things have been blown up, and back in Russia, things
Yeah.
have been hit. As
Oh,
somebody said, there's no, the Russians have no rear area anymore.
no, exactly. I mean, from what I understand, they lost a third of their strategic bomber fleet in one day because of a Ukrainian drone attack. That's
Yes,
incredible.
that was something. If Ian Fleming had written that, that it might have been rejected by the publisher. It's like that's not
Yeah,
believable.
exactly. Truth is stranger than
James
fiction.
Bond wouldn't have run into this. It's too strange, too crazy.
Yeah. Well, and I guess Zelensky showed Trump that he does hold a few cards. So,
Yes, that's one of the columnists said that. I think
but
more than a few.
well, and from an American perspective, that was the Russian strategic bomber force that, it was designed to carry nuclear weapons to North America. Um, and having that eliminated, Ukraine just did the US and Canada a huge favor.
Mhm. Although, the thing about the nuclear weapons kept us alive during the darkest part of the Cold War was that, okay, we can win, but we can't win too much. Or if, like at the end of near the end of World War II in Europe, when Hitler was hurt, supposedly said that, and when he was depressed about something, he said, "Yeah, if I had a button I could push to destroy the world, I just might do it."
Yeah, that's
And
that's the
now
scary
there are
thing.
such buttons.
Yeah, well, they are exactly. And I hadn't heard that story specifically about Hitler, but you know, uh, the mental fitness of someone like Putin, like he has no way out of this war that he can save face. Like the Ukrainians are not willing to cede the territory that they've lost, and they're quite possibly going to be able to capture it because they've got better technology now and better tactics, and they're not just sending meat waves at the machine guns or
Which the Russians
drones.
have been doing. They're
Exactly.
probably up to 1 million casualties,
I
sometimes.
heard something just recently that the military gains that Russia made in the last year in terms of territory are equivalent to about the size of Rhode Island.
Yeah, something like that. And it's farm countries, which is nice, but is it worth that many lives?
Yeah, I
And then
mean,
the other thing is the Kerch Bridge.
yeah,
Again, another drone, this submarine drone, damaged that. And speaking of engineers, there was, I forget the guy's name. He said, you really have to test that to know what shape that bridge is in, how
yeah,
much traffic it could take before it might collapse on them.
yeah.
So between those, the the planes, the factories that have been hit, including chip making factories, including the powder making factory, including the chemical plant that makes fuel for drones. That's where, uh, gee, if they lose the drone capability, if the Kerch Bridge is cut off and a whole bunch of troops are captured in Crimea, yeah, then the world might be in better shape. Or hunker down in the
or
bunker.
well, exactly. And I don't know what I mean, Trump seems pretty chummy or wants to be pretty chummy with Putin, but Biden's administration apparently, and I think again, I might have heard this from Peter Zion or somebody like that, but some of these pundits. But essentially, the story is that in the first few weeks of the war with Ukraine, the CIA basically sent Putin a note, and it's like, these are all the places that you were in the last 2 weeks. If you try to use a nuke, we know where you are. So, basically, don't do that. And not only the Americans, I mean, nobody wants to see a nuclear war, right? And that's exactly the basis, the rationale behind Israel attacking Iran is like they don't trust the Iranian leadership to handle nuclear weapons, given that they've essentially said that one of their missions is to destroy the state of Israel. So,
Yeah, and worse, there's some of the beliefs is that the world might have a major war. Much of it would be destroyed in fire, and there would be an Ayatollah who would fight in that war and would eventually win. So they believe that they're ready to fight a nuclear war, kind of
mm,
like a lot of the people in the Soviet and American militaries in the 50s.
mhm.
And so far, we've been lucky.
Yeah, well, let's hope that streak continues. And I think it's also good that China has essentially, if I understand it correctly, President Xi has made it clear to Putin that he doesn't want any nuclear weapons to be used as well. But yeah,
But yeah, we don't know what they're saying behind the scenes because that was like speaking of don't know what Trump is up to. It would seem like there was a little tiff between Netanyahu and Trump, but
yes,
actually they were preparing for the attack, and the United States has plausible deniability, but probably the U.S. Spy information real time was being given and is still being given
yeah.
for Israeli attacks,
There's
including
no
drone
doubt.
attacks.
Israel, I don't think, would go on a mission like this without at least letting the United States know that they were going to do this. And it's kind of interesting that, like, there's a CBC column. I can send it to you, but what about it or something like that. It's a little news piece, and the guy there essentially says makes the case that Trump was in negotiation with Iran to end their nuclear program,
Mm.
and the Iranians, and he gave them what 60 days or something like that,
And it's day
and it was
61.
day
All hell
61
broke
is
loose.
when the attack broke out, and so that kind of gives you an idea that okay, Trump might have said something to Netanyahu like, let's try this, and if it doesn't work, then you have our blessing. But we're gonna, you know, say our hands are clean. We didn't have anything to do with this. Um, but of course, all the weapons that Israel is using were essentially from the U.S. So in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, the U.S. and Israel are pretty closely tied. Um, and the other thing that's interesting is that it may have been that the Iranians were just stringing Trump along and stuff because the International Nuclear Energy Agency, whatever it's called, was essentially saying that a lot of the enriched uranium that they were tracking all of a sudden kind of disappeared and was no longer being tracked properly. And so that's a clear indication that it might have been being diverted for non-civilian use.
Oh yeah, and parts of their nuclear industry was probably invisible to the inspectors anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
So they really don't know. They were, by some accounts, they were within days of doing it, or maybe
Yeah.
even have a couple bombs possibly buried under 30 or 100 feet of rubble now. But
Well, and then that begs the question of what, you know, Israel has demonstrated that they're pretty good at shooting down Iranian missiles. So if Iran was to attack Israel, would using a missile be the most intelligent way to do it, or maybe they just bring a truck across the border or something?
yeah, either one of those. But where the trick is, the point is, if they have nuclear weapons, they become orders of magnitude more lethal in
Right.
dealing with the Israelis. And so that's why the Israelis and the United States wanted to have it back. And Iran, of course, they were stringing them along like, hey, if we can just last out this guy another 3.5 years and we'll have our buddies back in.
Yeah.
Like Obama, like possibly a closet Muslim, worse, a Shiite Muslim.
Mm.
I mean, the Sunnis are more likely people you can negotiate with. The Shiites, they've had this thing about you can lie about anything. We got to fight the war, and that was the war between Shia and Sunni was more terrible than the religious wars in Europe. It was the fitna, that war, and it was saying I think in Iraq it was that 50 years of civil war are better than one day of fitna.
Fitna? What's fitna? Sorry.
That's the religious wars.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's a number of smaller groups like the Alawites, but the main things are between Shia and Sunni.
Yeah.
And at one point, the Shias had major presence all the way into Egypt, and the Sunnis beat them back. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, things always seem different in different places, but in a lot of ways they're the same.
Yeah. I'm just going to turn this on with the music, or hopefully the audio won't come on. Okay, there we go. Pause. So I'm going to give you the link to that article that I was talking about in the notes if you want to include it. But I really like the summary that they gave of, the reasons for Israel going to war and how much the Americans might have known, and how much they're kind of bending over backwards to say, hey, we didn't do this. And, you know, but at the same time, I mean, it, it's no Iran is not a friend to the to Americans in general, I guess you could say.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for bad blood. Uh, there was one Shah that was deposed, and then I can't even think of it. There was a president that was elected in
Mossadegh,
Iran.
yeah,
What?
President Mossadegh was ousted by the CIA
Mossadegh, that
because
was the second one. And then when the Shah gotten got very fancy with all the things he did, and at one point he had like 1/3 the air force of the Soviet Union, which was like 1/10 would be good enough to keep the Soviets from wanting to mess with you. But if you have 1/3, you might be tempted to invade them, and so that was scary. And then came up with the White Revolution, which was communizing farms by a different name, which
Mhm.
made everybody in the country mad at him.
Right.
But 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 he was associated with the United States, and when he was gone, the mullahs took over, and Carter incompetently tried to get our embassy staff back and got a bunch of American troops killed. So
Yeah.
there's been, and of course, the United States was supplying weapons to different outfits like the Kurds and
Yeah.
whatnot. So that's see, what is it? Maybe about 70 years of sorted on again, off again uh, alliances and arguments.
Yeah. Well,
So
and
yeah, the uh, Shah in World War II, Shah's father was deposed by the Allies. So that was the first Shah being deposed.
mhm.
So the Iranians, even if they weren't in favor of the Shah, they said, "Hey, aren't we a independent country?"
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I know quite a few Iranian people, and they're lovely people. It's just, and a lot of them have, moved to Canada to escape that regime.
Hmm.
Um, so, it's just like anything else. I know Russian people who hate Putin as well. So,
Oh
um,
yeah,
the political leader isn't necessarily doesn't represent the people, and in the same way that a lot of Canadians were not fans of Justin Trudeau or Donald Trump in the States right now. So,
yes. There's a pattern that way. Politicians frequently have fast friends and faster enemies.
yeah. But
Yeah,
anyway, so we're at about an hour and a half,
yeah.
and we've
Yeah, we
we've
we went into an entirely different topic from cars, but
but those are the
so
conversations
we'll
I
say
like.
that's two topics, and what's going to happen this week in the drone wars part two, part
Well, I think
dukes.
I think context is important. So,
There you go. All right, yeah, and I'll see if I can keep up uh, fast production of putting things out. And I may or may not. I might just leave that to our discussion at the end.
well,
I
I
might
mean,
get lazy.
it's open. It's not like we said anything that was terribly embarrassing. I don't think
Yeah,
so.
it was just like, well, what are we gonna do with this? Yeah, so we added something. Da, 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 and it's, yeah, nothing. As you say, yeah, nothing that would be a problem.
All right. Anyway, we
So,
should probably
oh,
end the recording on this one. Have a
uh,
good week. And
and yeah, and 2 weeks from now, because I have some family business to take
right,
care of.
fair enough. 2 weeks sounds good.
All right, see you in 2 weeks, and we'll see what we might talk about.
All right. Have a good
Okay,
one.
so long.
Bye bye.